categorical data from last class. We got through 1 through 6 last time, and we're going to pick up at 7. After today, you should be able to do the rest of day 2 homework and day 3 on sapling. Okay, so we covered a little bit of this last time. We did some interpreting of bar graphs, but we're going to do different types of that today and use them to compare distributions. Okay. Then another thing we did last time was calculate the marginal, joint, and conditional relative frequencies. We just haven't actually talked about what those 3 things are called technically yet. We've just done them. And then lastly, we're going to describe with some graphs. So starting out on number 7 here, we're going to take our information from last time. I have some fake data here. You can either use your information that you have or copy mine, but I'll show you how we'll do this. Go ahead and get out your computer and get an Excel document, just a blank one, and you can type in your table of values, and then we'll talk about these 2 graphs. We are going to fit 2 on here, so make sure when you go to draw your graph, you're doing them small enough so both of them fit. So we're going to start with just highlighting the chart like we did last time, and we're going to do Insert Chart. Recommended charts usually have the right thing popped up. And today we're going to talk about a cluster or a side-by-side chart. I like vertical bars, so down here is our clustered column rather than our clustered row. And it gives us the instructions that we want to group not by elective on the x-axis, but by core class. That's not an option here, but we are able to change it after the fact. So go ahead and hit OK. And then up at the top here, you'll see these options. If you don't, you just need to click on this Chart Design tab, and then we're going to select Switch Row and Column. And this is what we're looking to copy down. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change these on Excel. You do not have to. You just have to give an appropriate title and axis labels on your paper. So we are talking about a favorite elective by, it's grouped by, core class that was chosen. All right, and then along the bottom here, we need to see an axis label. So we'll hit that little plus sign like we did last time, axis titles. So we can call this core classes. And then over here will be our count of students. Along the bottom is where the electives come into play. It's the legend. You don't have to put this along the bottom. It can be along the side, kind of like you see with a pie chart. But that color coding is the only way that these electives are showing up. So a lot of times, I'll actually title the key or the legend as well by that. And then section them off below by the different colors. Okay, so you're going to pause the video so that you can copy that down on your graph. There's no reason to put these half values, okay, but just sketch out the picture of that. Now we're going to repeat this process with a different kind of graph. You can keep this if you want. I'm going to delete it just so it's out of my screen, but again, you can just insert another one on top of it. It's not a big deal. But now what we're going to do is do a stacked 100% graph. We did this on the front side. We added up our stacks because we already had percentages. What's going to be different here is we're starting with flat counts rather than starting with percentages. Excel can do that at the same time just by using Insert Chart again. On the recommended charts, you'll see stacked bar graphs going horizontally here and going vertically here. But if you click on this, notice the bars are different heights because it's talking about the frequency. This is just a stacked column. It doesn't give us 100% stacked vertically, it just gives it horizontally. So what you're going to do is go to All Charts here, and then find the stacked where the bars are the same height. That's your 100 stacked column. And then we want to choose the one of these two where the core class is on the bottom. Okay. Using Excel here lets us see the proportions of these easily without having to calculate them by hand first. Okay, so just like with a pie chart, this really helps us think proportionally. Okay, so I'm going to let you copy that down, and then we're actually going to add some notes to this one. Okay, because I want you to talk it or be able to calculate these percents. You're going to have to on your homework. Even though Excel is doing it for us here, we're going to talk about where these proportions are really coming from. So I'll copy this so that we can chat for a minute. So over here, you'll notice that under the math column, this first percent here is almost to 30. So let's do some math to calculating, and I want you to write it directly on your graph here. So these are the numbers from the table. And what we're going to do, since we're focusing on math and English separately, is we're going to total these up separately. So here we've got 15, and here we've got 3 for a grand total of 18. This first section was talking about art, so that's 4 out of 15. Okay, and 4 out of 15 gives you the percent right in between here. The next one was 4 out of 15 again. And then it was 3 out of 15, 1 out of 15, and 3 out of 15. Okay, so just in your calculator, change each of those to percents for me. We've got this one is 20%, which makes this one 20% as well. When we go back to 1 out of 15, that's 6.6 repeating. If you can write these as exact decimals, I want you to. All of them are going to be rational numbers, but some of them you won't be able to tell when they repeat soon enough, so you'll just round it in those cases. These ones we're seeing nice repeating values, but that tells you where all of these proportions, fix that, all of these proportions are coming from. These are equally spaced because they both represent that 26.6 repeating percent. So similarly over here, this would be 1 out of 3, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 3, each counting for 33.3% of the English people. So now we're going to talk about, is there an association between favorite core subject and favorite elective? If so, describe it. So this word association just asks, if I focus on knowing that a student is a math student preferred, or if they prefer English, would that make the likelihood of them choosing, I'm going to go with an obvious one here, the, let's see, art, okay? So would that make the likelihood of art change? Okay, so from here to here are roughly the same proportion of art students and English students showing up, okay? And maybe that one's not super clear because they are close-ish, 26% compared to 33%. But then what if I go to this one right here, the foreign language? Okay, foreign language was 1 out of 15, it was 6%. Would knowing that a math student, we were looking at a math student, would that change the likelihood of them choosing foreign language when we compare to knowing they're an English student? And hopefully that's very obvious. So there is an association between core subject and favorite elective, because if we know they're a math student, that's going to make them less likely to choose foreign language than if we knew that they were an English student. So what I want you to do when you're deciding association is you're going to look left to right at the sizes. Okay, so make yourself a little note here. Look at proportions between the bars. Okay, so left to right, no association would look the same. Left to right for an association where we see here, they are not the same. So yes, and our example here is if we know a student prefers math, then they are less likely to have chosen foreign language, because that was the obvious one, as their favorite elective. So that is just one of the things you could say here. You're going to pick out something that's true. You could also say that for this, what's that third option, was PE. Okay, so we could say if they're a math student preferred, then they're less likely to have chosen PE as their favorite subject as well, because those are obviously different. Okay, same thing with this one that was entirely missing. You could talk about music, okay, because music here from one to the other, it's not even showing up. Okay, so those are the important things to focus on. If there was not an association, what would the graphs look like? So each column, or each bar, would have the same proportion within it. And that's the second variable, whatever you're working with. Okay, so I want you to draw a little picture of how that would look. Draw me two bars, and then let's just pick two categories so it's obvious. Let's make this one right here, and then that one would be roughly the same height. They don't have to be the same, equally patterned here, just like this distance doesn't have to be the same as this, but left to right, whatever your categories are, they should match all the way across the board. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is talk about vocab. A two-way table is just a way to organize two different variables. Okay, so I have an example here that we're going to go through and practice with. We've got environmental club. They were asked whether they're a member or not, yes or no. And snowmobile use, they were asked to classify if they've never used them, they rent one, or they own one. Okay, so that's organized. A chart to organize two variables. And within that, we can use it to calculate relative frequency. There are three types: marginal, joint, and conditional. And it's based on what we're focusing on. So if I ask you a question about an entire variable related to the total, that's going to be considered marginal. So let me give you some example before we write this definition. Looking at this club, if I ask you a question like, what proportion of these people surveyed never used a snowmobile, I would need to go all the way over here to the 657 and put it over the grand total. So this would be the marginal distribution of snowmobile use. Because I'm doing a whole row over the grand total. I could also do that for whether they are a member of the environmental club. If I want to say the marginal distribution for that, we would talk about all of the no's over the total and all of the yeses over the total. But questions I'm going to ask you are going to be like, give me the proportion of people who are not in the environmental club. So you'd go 1221 over the total. So you're going to focus on one variable, total. And remember, those are going to show up in either the rows or the columns, over the grand total. Okay. Next thing is joint, which means there are two things that we're going to focus on. I'm going to ask you questions that have two different conditions. So instead of just, are you an environmental club member, I'm going to ask you, are you a member of the environmental club and have never used a snowmobile? So that would be the intersection of here and here, which would be 212 over 1526. So the and is going to be important. Okay, but still we're going to talk about proportions or percents when we're dealing with these frequencies. Okay, so what we're going to do for our definition on this one is we're going to have an and statement for two variables, which is going to be in the intersection. Rather than a row or column total, it's going to be one single cell, and then that's going to be over still the grand total. Okay, that is joint, because joint means together with. We want both things happening. The last one is conditional, and that's going to be the only one, let me put a little star there, the only one where the total changes. Okay, so I want you to actually start with the back half here. This is going to be a specific variable total. So I'm going to ask you a question like, what percent of environmental club members, I only care about the people who were in the environmental club, of those, who are snowmobile owners? So once I've narrowed it down to this column, I care about that 16. So within whatever I want, so one condition within that row or column. So I really have to do this total first and then go back to the top number. So let me ask you another one. If I say, what is the proportion of environmental club members given they rent a snowmobile? So given you rent a snowmobile would be you have to be in this row, and I want the environmental club members, so that would be 77 over 574. So only time we change the total is conditional. The other two go with the grand total. I want you to pause the video and try those last 5 problems based on what you've learned. Okay. The first 2 were conditional because they changed the total. This one was only looking at the juniors, and then from that total of 51, the 14 who were working. The Part B was only looking at the seniors, and of those, not working but had a job. So just in that column, the 40. Remember, we're going to round if it's not obvious, and you have to say approximately for me. The next 2 were over the grand total, so marginal or joint. Marginal means we're looking at one thing, so this was one row. And then, and if there are 2 conditions or one cell, that's going to be joint. Okay, both of those you needed to round. The last question on there was an association between grade level and job experience because knowing what grade a student was in helps us predict their job experience. So you would give me some example. You would say, yes, there is an association, and give me an example. If we know they're a senior, then they are more likely to be currently working. I could say, if we know they are a junior, they are more likely to never have had a job. Something that's obvious. These are roughly the same size from one to the other, so that wouldn't be a good chunk to use. If you have any trouble with any of those questions on the homework, please come see me.